The Arab world has one of the most diverse political ecosystems out there. Across 22 countries, there are monarchies glowing with stability to republics reshaped by revolution, war, and constitutional reinvention. The Arab world, although connected on a map, exhibits so many overlapping political realities stitched together by history, faith, power, and survival. Some states move like clockwork, such as with the monarchies, where succession is carefully choreographed behind closed doors. Others are republics in name, where elections exist, but the real levers of power sit elsewhere. Militaries, sometimes in political or religious parties, and at others in institutions that outlive governments themselves. And then there are countries where the very idea of a single government dissolves into multiple authorities, competing over the same land, the same people, but their own version of a future. So how is governance practiced? And how is leadership inherited, negotiated, and contested in the Arab world? And more importantly, how can systems that look so similar on paper behave radically different in practice? Because constitutions, if they do exist, can promise one thing yet deliver another. A parliament can exist without any power. A presidency can be elected without any control. A monarchy can modernize without surrendering a shred of authority. And in between all of that, the simplest of questions can clarify everything. Who really governs here? So we'll move fairly quickly and alphabetically from one country to another, cutting through all the noise and looking directly at how power is built, maintained, and transferred. Some of these countries will feel fairly stable. Others will feel fairly fragile. A few will feel like systems are held together more by momentum than by design. Algeria is a semi-presidential republic where the president serves as head of state and is elected through national elections. But real power operates through a balance between civilian leadership and a strong military security establishment. The current president, Abdelmajid Tebboune, came to office in 2019 after the Hirak protest movement forced the resignation of longtime ruler Abdelaziz Bouteflika, marking a major political turning point. Elections are held regularly for both the presidency and the parliament, and multiple parties participate. But the military and security institutions remain the most influential actors in ensuring political stability and shaping leadership outcomes. Since independence in 1962, Algeria has been characterized by a state structure where the army plays a central role in governance, especially after the civil war of the 1990s. So, who really rules Algeria? Formally, it's the elected presidency, but in practice, the military and security establishment act as the backbone of the political system, guiding continuity, stability, and elite transitions within the state. Bahrain is an absolute hereditary monarchy led by King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa, who holds broad constitutional powers, including appointing the prime minister and shaping national policy. The head of government is Prime Minister Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa, who's also the crown prince, keeping executive authority within the ruling family in a son-to-son succession structure. Bahrain has a parliament with an elected lower house and an appointed upper house. But legislative power is balanced in a way that preserves strong royal influence. Elections are held regularly, and political societies operate under regulation. But the monarchy remains central to decision-making. Since 1999, governance has combined limited parliamentary participation with firm executive control by the Al Khalifa dynasty. So, who really rules Bahrain? The monarchy, primarily led by the king and supported by the ruling family network. It remains the core authority, while elected institutions function within a limited and controlled constitutional framework. Egypt is a presidential republic where power is heavily concentrated in the office of the president. Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, a former military commander, leads the state after rising to power following Egypt's first and only democratic experiment that led to the 2013 political crisis. While elections are held and parliament exists, political competition operates within a very controlled environment. Since the 1952 revolution that ended the monarchy, Egypt has been dominated by military-linked leadership, and every single president since then has come from the armed forces. The military remains one of the most influential institutions in the country, shaping not only security policy, but also economic and political life. Succession in Egypt is difficult to assess today. No vice president is currently in position, with no clear methodology on identifying the next president. So, who really rules Egypt? Formally, it's the presidency, but in practice, it's a system where executive authority and military institutions are deeply intertwined at the center of power. Iraq is a federal parliamentary republic, where power is formally divided between a president, Nizar Ahmedi, and a prime minister, Ali al-Zaidi, who's currently heading the government. Ahmedi was elected to office by a council of representatives who themselves are a group of 325 elected officials. The president then appoints the prime minister. However, real political authority isn't concentrated in one single office. Instead, it's shaped by coalition politics, where parliamentary blocs negotiate to form governments after elections. Since the fall of Saddam Hussein in 2003 and the creation of the 2005 constitution, Iraq's political system has been built on a balance between Shia, Sunni, and Kurdish representation. Over time, political parties, regional authorities, and armed groups have all become influential actors within the state. So, who really rules Iraq? It's not a single leader or institution, but a complex and shifting network of parties, regional powers, and state institutions sharing authority in an often fragile equilibrium. Jordan is a constitutional monarchy where real executive authority rests with King Abdullah II. The king appoints the prime minister, approves governments, and retains the power to dissolve parliament. While elections are held and a parliament exists, it doesn't independently determine who governs the country. Jordan's modern political system is rooted in the Hashemite dynasty, which has ruled the country since its formation in the early 20th century. The monarchy relies heavily on a delicate balancing act of the major local tribes to consolidate domestic security and regime support. Over time, Jordan has introduced gradual political reforms, but these haven't shifted core decision-making away from the monarchy. Political parties exist, but remain relatively weak, and the security establishment plays a stabilizing role in governance and are under direct control of the king. So, who really rules Jordan? The monarchy remains the central authority, with elected institutions operating within a carefully manicured constitutional framework. Please check out our new course on how to navigate Arab identity in today's world, how to define and pinpoint yourself within the various tensions found in the duality of tradition and modernity, the foundations that make us unique, even our contradictions. Unapologetically Arab is a 13-chapter course intent on helping anyone interested in appreciating what it means to be an Arab. Join now by clicking on the link in the video description at either Thinkific or Patreon, and begin your empowering journey of Arab discovery. Kuwait is a constitutional emirate where power is shared between the ruling Al-Sabah family and a uniquely influential elected parliament. The current Emir Mish'al Ahmed Al-Jaber Al-Sabah holds ultimate constitutional authority, including appointing the prime minister, dissolving parliament, and approving all governments. However, unlike most Gulf states, Kuwait has an active national assembly that is elected by citizens and plays a real legislative and oversight role. Political parties aren't formally recognized, but organized blocs and alliances shape parliamentary behavior. In 2024, Parliament was suspended by the Emir for the next 48 months due to the constant infighting and conflict between the elected parliament and the appointed cabinet. And the reason was that Parliament was hindering vital economic and developmental progress. Consequently, power was then consolidated with the Emir and without any parliamentary resistance. So, who really rules Kuwait? The Emir primarily, and the ruling Al-Sabah family remain the central governing force, with executive authority strengthened as parliamentary power has been repeatedly interrupted and weakened in practice. On paper, Lebanon is a parliamentary republic, but its political system is built on sectarian power sharing rather than centralized authority. The presidency is reserved for a Maronite Christian, the prime minister is a Sunni Muslim, and the speaker of the parliament is a Shia Muslim. A structure established by the 1943 National Pact and reshaped after the Civil War by the Taif Agreement. While elections are held and institutions exist, real power is distributed among sectarian political parties and long-standing elite networks. The introduction of a fourth power player in Hezbollah on the political scene in the 1990s and Lebanon's complex political system became even more fragmented. Political decisions and effectiveness often require consensus between rival groups, making governance slow and complicated. So, who really rules Lebanon? Not a single leader or institution, but a delicate and often unstable balance of sectarian blocs, political elites, and external influences competing within the same state structure. Libya is a state in transition. In practice, it's deeply fragmented. The internationally recognized government of national unity, led by the Prime Minister Abdelhamid Dbeibeh in Tripoli, represents the executive authority under UN-backed arrangements. However, Libya doesn't have a single unified government. Since the 2011 revolution that removed Muammar al-Gaddafi, state collapse and political division have led to competing centers of power. An Eastern-based administration, the Government of National Stability, linked to the House of Representatives, operates separately, while numerous armed groups and regional militias control territories across the country. Attempts at national elections and political unifications have repeatedly stalled. The indefinite postponement of national elections originally scheduled for December 2021 has left the country in institutional limbo. So, who really rules Libya? Power is dispersed across competing governments and armed actors, making Libya a fragmented state where authority is contested rather than centralized or fully institutionalized. Mauritania is a presidential republic where the head of state holds strong executive authority. The current president, Mohamed Ould El-Ghazouani, came to power in 2019 through elections after serving as a senior military figure under the previous administration, marking a rare, peaceful transfer of power within the ruling elite. Since independence in 1960, Mauritania has experienced periods of authoritarian rule and multiple military coups, which established the armed forces as a central political actor. Over time, the country transitioned toward electoral governance, but political competition remains closely managed and the military continues to play an influential, stabilizing role. Elections are held and multiple parties exist, but executive power remains highly centralized. So, who really rules Mauritania? Formally, it's the elected presidency, but in practice, authority is shared between the president, the military establishment, and entrenched elite networks that, together, shape the country's political continuity. Morocco is a constitutional monarchy led by King Mohammed VI of the Alawi dynasty. The Alawis have been both the symbolic and effective rulers of Morocco since the early 20th century. The country does hold regular parliamentary elections, and the prime minister is drawn from the winning political party. However, real political authority remains strongly centered in the monarchy. The king appoints key officials, presides over the Council of Ministers, and retains decisive influence over defense, foreign policy, and religion. While the 2011 reforms expanded the powers of elected institutions, they didn't fundamentally shift core executive authority away from the palace. Political parties operate freely within certain limits, but strategic decision-making remains centralized. So, who really rules Morocco? Formally, it's a constitutional system with an elected government, but in practice, the monarchy continues to serve as the central force shaping the country's political direction. Oman is an absolute monarchy where real authority rests with the Sultan. The current ruler, Haytham ibn Tariq al-Sa'id, came to power in 2020 following the death of Sultan Qaboos bin Sa'id, who had ruled the country for 5 decades. Unlike many monarchies, Oman's last succession was prepared in advance through a sealed letter naming the next ruler, thus preventing a power struggle. While the country has no constitution, it does have a consultative council and other advisory institutions. Ultimate decision-making remains with the Sultan, who appoints the government and directs national policy. The future of succession in Oman now follows a more direct son-to-son methodology, with the appointment of Yazan bin Haytham as crown prince. So, who really rules Oman? The Sultan, of course, who stands at the center, but he governs through a system shaped by consultation and carefully negotiated continuity rather than political contest. Palestine is a fragmented political entity with divided governance, where authority is split between two competing administrations rather than a single sovereign state. The internationally recognized president is Mahmoud Abbas, who leads the Palestinian Authority in parts of the West Bank and also represents Palestine both internationally and diplomatically. After the death of Yasser Arafat in 2004, Abbas was elected president of the Palestinian Authority in 2005. The election was seen as a continuation of the Fatah-led political order rather than a full system change. However, the broader political system fractured after the 2006 legislative elections, when Hamas won parliamentary control. By 2007, internal conflict led to a territorial split. The Palestinian Authority governed the West Bank, while Hamas took control of Gaza, creating two competing centers of authority. So, who really rules Palestine? Power in Palestine is divided. Abbas leads the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, while Hamas governs Gaza, within a landscape shaped by political division, limited sovereignty, and external constraints. Qatar is an absolute hereditary emirate ruled by the Al Thani family since the mid-19th century. The current emir, Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, came to power in 2013 after his father voluntarily abdicated, continuing a dynastic system that has governed Qatar for many generations. His father, Hamad bin Khalifa, transformed the country after taking power through a bloodless coup d'etat in 1995, centralizing the state and expanding Qatar's global influence through energy wealth and diplomacy. There are no national elections for any executive leadership or political parties competing for power. Instead, governance is concentrated within the ruling family, supported by a technocratic cabinet appointed by the emir. While institutions manage policy execution, ultimate authority rests at the top of the monarchy. So, who really rules Qatar? The emir primarily, and then the Al Thani dynasty, where state power, strategic decision-making, and political authority are unified within a single ruling family structure. Saudi Arabia is an absolute hereditary monarchy ruled by the House of Saud since the start of the 20th century. King Salman is the head of state, while Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman serves as prime minister and is widely considered as the kingdom's leading decision-maker. Leadership passes within the royal family rather than through national elections, and political parties aren't allowed. Saudi citizens don't elect their national leaders, and the appointed Consultative Council has only advisory powers. Unlike countries where armies have historically intervened in politics, Saudi Arabia's military remains firmly under royal control. Traditionally, succession was based on a brotherhood model, yet since King Salman became the ruler, a significant change came into play. The succession model shifted to father to son. So who really rules Saudi Arabia? The answer is the royal family itself, and especially today, the king and crown prince, who exercise decisive influence over the country's political, economic, and strategic direction. Somalia is a federal parliamentary republic, but in practice it remains a fragmented state with limited central authority. The federal government of Somalia, led by President Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud, is based in Mogadishu and represents the internationally recognized state. However, since the collapse of the central government in 1991, Somalia has undergone decades of civil conflict and state rebuilding. The 2012 federal constitution created a system of semi-autonomous regional states such as Puntland and Jubaland, which maintain significant independence from the center. At the same time, the militant group Al-Shabaab continues to control and contest large rural areas, while clan-based structures remain central to local governance. So, who really rules Somalia? Authority is divided between the federal government, regional administrations, clan networks, and armed insurgent groups, making Somalia a highly decentralized system where power is local and continuously contested. Sudan is officially a transitional state, but in reality it has fragmented into competing centers of power. After the 2019 uprising removed longtime President Omar al-Bashir, a civilian military transitional government was formed under Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdouk, aiming to guide the country toward democratic elections. However, this transition collapsed following the 2021 military takeover, which dissolved civilian authority. Since then, Sudan has descended into civil war between the Sudanese armed forces and the Rapid Support Forces led by Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo. Both forces control different regions, institutions, and resources, while civilian political actors hold limited influence. So, who really rules Sudan? There's no single governing authority. Power is divided between rival military factions and disjointed institutions, making Sudan one of the clearest examples of a state where sovereignty is contested and governance is defined by ongoing conflict rather than stable institutions. Syria is a presidential republic, but in practice has become a fragmented and war-affected state. The Ba'ath Party came to power in the early 1960s that was then subsequently followed by a father-to-son succession method, seeing Hafez al-Assad and then his son, Bashar, as president. Before 2011, Syria was one of the most centralized states in the region, with authority concentrated in the presidency and intelligence services. However, the uprising in 2011 escalated into a civil war that fractured the country into multiple zones of control. Today, the government in Damascus, and led by President Ahmed al-Shara since 2025, represents the victors of the uprising and retains control over major cities and institutions, while other regions are governed by Kurdish authorities, opposition groups, and local armed forces, all under varying degrees of external influence. So, who really rules Syria? In government areas, the presidency dominates, but across the country, power is divided among competing authorities, making Syria a state with contested and incomplete sovereignty. Tunisia is a semi-presidential republic where executive power is formally shared between the president and parliament. But in recent years, authority has become increasingly concentrated in the presidency. The current head of state, Qais Said, was elected in 2019 after a wave of anti-establishment sentiment following the Arab Spring era, which began in Tunisia in 2011 with the overthrow of longtime ruler Zain al-Abidin bin Ali. Initially, Tunisia developed a pluralistic parliamentary system with coalition governments and the balance of power between institutions. However, in 2021, President Said suspended parliament and later introduced constitutional changes that significantly expanded presidential authority and reduced the role of legislative bodies. Elections still take place, but political competition and institutional balance have been reshaped toward executive centralization. So, who really rules Tunisia? Formally, it remains a republic with democratic structures, but in practice, power is now concentrated in the presidency, with Qais Said as the central decision-maker shaping the direction of the state. The United Arab Emirates is a federation of 7 hereditary monarchies, each ruled by its own royal family. At the federal level, power is centered in Abu Dhabi and Dubai. The president, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, is the ruler of Abu Dhabi, while the prime minister, Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, governs Dubai and oversees much of federal administration. This approach is based on political tradition and not constitutional law since the UAE's foundation in 1971 by Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan, who united the Emirates into a single state while preserving the autonomy of each ruler. There are no national political parties or competitive elections for top leadership, and the Federal National Council plays a largely advisory role. So, who really rules the UAE? A small network of hereditary rulers, especially those in Abu Dhabi, who govern through consensus within a federation of dynasties, rather than through electoral politics. Yemen, in theory, is a republic, one in transition, but in practice, it's a deeply fragmented state. The internationally recognized leadership is the Presidential Leadership Council, led by Rashad Al-Alemi, formed in 2022 after the transfer of power from former President Abdurrabbu Mansour Hadi. However, this government operates mainly from abroad and doesn't control all of Yemen. Since the Houthi takeover of the capital Sana'a in 2015, the country has been divided between rival authorities, including the Houthis in the north, Southern Transitional Forces, and various local armed groups. The modern crisis stems from the collapse of unity after the 1990 merger of North and South Yemen and the breakdown of the post-2011 transition that was meant to peacefully move Yemen out of long-time authoritarian rule and prevent a full collapse of the state. So, who really rules Yemen? Authority is split across competing governments, armed movements, and external interference, making Yemen one of the most politically fragmented states in the Arab world. As must now be clear to you, the Arab world is anything but a uniform system of governance. It's a living spectrum of authority shaped by history, geography, and the long negotiation between tradition, colonial legacy, and modern statehood. Some systems lean on dynasties that have refined continuity into an art form. Others rely on republics still wrestling with the balance between institutions and influence. And some exist in a more unstable reality where governance is not a single voice, but a dissonance of competing claims over legitimacy and control. Perhaps the deeper question isn't simply who rules, but how governance evolves when history, society, and state building are still realizing their final shape, and whether the Arab region's future systems will continue inherited patterns or gradually define forms of rule more fully aligned with its own socio-political trajectory.